Morning, brothers and sisters. Today I want to make this little video is about the story of Paul being sent to Rome, from Acts chapter 27. Well-known story, of course, and it's the subject of Monday's devotional, which I write a devotional Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I've been working my way through Acts, coming close to the end, and of course Paul's been sent to Rome under the guard of a centurion, soldiers, and this is about his journey there. And Acts 27 is very interesting elements in it that are absolutely apt for our lives as Christians today, who we listen to, and the results of not listening to the voice, the reasoning of God, and going along with the reasoning of men, which is not always wrong, of course, but there you have it. So I'm going to read out the devotional part first. It's from Acts 27, and I want to highlight one particular part of it. Acts 27:10 says, "And he said unto them, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only for the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." So there's Paul right from the beginning, just laying it right out there. He's speaking by the Spirit, of course. How could he possibly know otherwise? This is him that wanted to go to Rome. He wanted to present his case to Rome. He appealed to Caesar. And so he's not trying to avoid anything, but this particular ship, this particular journey, he's warning the men because he'd been told something in the Spirit. It's a prophetic warning that he's been given that this particular ship, if they set sail, it will end in disaster and the loss of not only the cargo and the ship, but the lives as well. So very serious word here. Stark warning indeed. Have you ever had a warning that you ignored? Maybe it was a check in your spirit, or a direct word from a brother or a sister. The centurion in this case decided to go with the experts, the helmsman and the owner of the ship. The majority were persuaded, and off they went. Now, we can't be too hard on these guys. Here is Paul, a tent maker. Now, what does he know about ships? I'm sure he'd been on a few. We know he'd been on shipwrecks as well, stranded in the ocean. But what does he really know about ships and weather? This man from Jerusalem, this Pharisee, this religious man, this tent maker, what does he know? And here you have the helmsman of the ship himself, who's probably spent all of his life from he was a small child, and the owner of the ship. We're assuming they all know a lot about oceans, tides, weathers. And the centurion is faced with this. The centurion liked him, there's no doubt about it. The story relates that. He likes Paul, and probably fascinated, I would imagine, by his Christianity. But he's left with this decision. Who do I listen to? Do I listen to the experts here, or do I listen to this guy? And I would imagine, not to be too hard on the centurion, that most of us would have went along with the helmsman, in this case, and the owner of the ship, and of course the majority were persuaded. And isn't that usually the case, brothers and sisters? That people typically go with the majority, whether it's in a Christian group or whether it's in a secular group. Human beings tend to move with the herd. That's what tends to happen. Remember, the Lord gave me a word a long time ago: if you're running with the crowd, you're running in the wrong direction. So you're kind of breaking from this fundamental feeling of safety within the crowd, within numbers, within the majority. The majority are saying it's so. You know, it's the path of least resistance to the flesh, to go along with the majority. But time and time again in the scriptures, that absolutely leads to disaster. So it's so important to be able to hear the still small voice of God, to be able to read his word, to be able to be directed by his Holy Spirit. And really this is what this whole story is about. So human logic can be very helpful, and common sense typically serves as well. Here we have a tent maker saying one thing, and the helmsman and the owner of the ship saying something else. Of course, the majority went with the experts. Isn't that typically the case in our world? We listen to experts. It might be doctors or lawyers, it might be politicians or financial advisors, yet in everything, to discount the word of God can be very dangerous, of course. The word might come from the Bible, perhaps the still small voice, perhaps a word of wisdom from a brother or a sister, perhaps even a prophecy. Yet in the end, many fall back and rely on the word and opinion of so-called experts. In verse 13 of Acts 27, we see a very typical scenario play out. All seems well at first. A south wind blew, and a favourable wind, seemingly confirming what the experts had said. Now, brothers and sisters, I've seen this a lot, where somebody, it seems like they have a good idea, they say, "Thus saith the Lord," and then maybe even if you have a check in your spirit, and you step back from that, and then it's seemingly successful. It begins to play out, you're thinking, where have I got that wrong? Because you see perhaps this initial success. Maybe like in a secular example in the world of finance, somebody advises you that, or advises people they should buy this stock or that stock, and people throw their lot in there and it initially goes up. And then, within 4 months, 6 months, it's tanked. So it all seems to go well initially, confirming your belief in this, what the majority is going along with. And I think a classic example for me was in the tragedy of 9/11, where there's a story about these two men that survived. They're way up high in the building, and they're making their way down the stairs, and they come across, they encounter a group of people, of 15 to 20 people, and the leader of that group of people was leading them to the roof because he told them this was the only way of escape. And these two guys tried with all of their hearts, saying, "No, that's not going to work. You need to come with us." And so these 15 or 20 people were faced with, shall we listen to the crowd or shall we listen to these two guys? Obviously, they didn't listen to the two guys. They went up and they were never heard of again. They all died. If you're part of a group of 15 or 20, it's a lot easier to the flesh to go along with that group, to listen to a lonesome voice or two voices in that example. That's just one example of going along with the crowd. Do not go along with the crowd, brothers and sisters. It's almost always, not always, but almost always running in the wrong direction. So this wind blew, a favourable wind, seemingly confirming what the experts had said. Yet before very long, the scenario Paul had laid out began to come to pass. For 14 long days, that's a long time, brothers and sisters. They were tossed violently in a huge storm. Don't know if you've ever been to sea. I have. I've been in big storms. It's absolutely terrifying. This is huge. This is huge. When experienced sailors believe they're all going to die, you know you're in trouble. So for 14 long days, they were tossed violently in a huge storm, and all seemed lost. Now it seems that men were ready to listen to the man of God. The man of God, Paul, had a vision, and he spoke with confidence. They were all going to live. That's a bold claim. His first claim is you're all going to die, and now the vision says you're all going to live. These are bold claims by a man who's listening to the Holy Spirit. But I would say the most dramatic moment was just about to unfold. There came a point where they're grounded, the ship is breaking up. Even though it's relatively close to shore, this is one of the most dangerous scenarios. If you know anything about seagoing stories, even though you're within sight of the shore, but you're foundered on the rocks, the ship begins to break up. It's a very dangerous scenario. It's as dangerous as being out in the deepest ocean in a storm, to be that close to the land, but caught in the rocks and begin to be broken to pieces. You are going to die. Now, there's a skiff there, according to the scriptures, and these boats would have skiffs. We still have skiffs today in boats. And they were going to go for the skiff. Of course they were. Of course they were going to go for the skiff. It's right there. The ship is breaking up. We are all going to die. That's the scenario, right? So the man of God had this vision. They were all going to live. Yet the most dramatic moment was just about to unfold. Paul demanded that they cut the skiff loose. What? This is your one escape? This boat, lifeboat, or boats, and this man is, not a sailor, tells you to cut them loose, and then if you don't cut them loose, you're all going to die. Now that's madness, my friend. That is absolute madness. That makes no sense whatsoever in the natural. To cut loose the lifeboat. But that's what Paul says. So in the end, of course, it makes no sense in the natural. In the vital moment, will you follow the direction of God? Will you abandon your common sense and the words of experts and follow blindly the advice from God? that again makes no sense. Can you give thanks? See, Paul breaks bread right in the middle of all this. Towards the end of all this, he breaks bread and gives thanks to God before he begins to speak to these sailors and encourages them to eat. He breaks bread. He has this communion with God himself. He's breaking bread. He gives thanks to God. Thanks to God. In the middle of a complete and utter disaster, he gives thanks to God. There's a key element there, brothers and sisters. First, listening, key elements. First, listening to being able to discern the still small voice of God. And secondly, being able to give thanks even in the most incredibly dark moments of your life, where it seems like you're going to die. It seems that all is lost, disaster's there, but God has spoken to Paul. Paul knows the voice of God. He understands what God had said, that all of these men were going to live. Even it looked like all of them are going to die. And of course that's exactly what happened, brothers and sisters. So, quick story, when I was first saved, about 2 years after I got saved, I was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis. 2/3 of each of the lung was covered in irreversible fibrosis. Not curable, but treatable in the short term, relatively short term. High doses of prednisone, 60 milligrams a day, for at least the first 6 months, and then moving on from there. Started taking it for a couple of weeks, and out of the blue, the Lord said to me, there's another way. And what he was doing, he was directing me to trust in him, put my trust in him, and not the medical field. And I knew, just 6 weeks previously, but I had a child, our third child. He had Down syndrome, he had medical problems. My poor wife was under a lot of pressure. And here, I turn and tell her I'm not taking these pills. The doctor told me that I will die. You will die. He was angry with me, as was my wife. And other people came knocking at the door, tell me how wrong I was. And of course, in the natural, that's exactly right. You know, here was I abandoning the ship? Was I making for the lifeboat and just escaping out of this world by not taking these pills? None of that was what was taking place. The Lord had said to me to trust him. To trust in him. Now, he didn't say trust in me and you'll live. He just said trust me. Come off these pills and trust me. And that's exactly what I did. I was learning fundamental lessons right at the beginning of my Christianity, just about 2 years in. And what I learned from that is the steps of a righteous man or woman are ordered of God. That's emblazoned upon my soul. Emblazoned upon my soul. God alone would determine when I died or if I lived. In this particular case. Because we don't make formulas, do we? So I'm not formalising anything. I'm not telling anybody to do anything here on this video. I'm telling you to listen to the voice of God. To be able to hear what the Spirit is saying to you. Well, that particular doctor was a pulmonologist. He was part of a study, a nationwide study on this particular disease. He asked me if I would allow him to take x-rays. He angrily asked me that, actually. Would I allow him to take x-rays of my lungs so he could monitor their regression? He said, at least in this way, there's something good will come of this. That's what he said, Jewish fella. And I said, sure, do I have to pay for it? And he goes, no. And I said, well, sure. So every 2 weeks I'd take the x-rays, and after a few months, sure enough, regression, harder to breathe. Got a call from my mother one morning. This is going to be at 5 o'clock in the morning, pretty substantial call. She apologised for waking me up. And she said this. She said, the Lord is going to heal you. Now that's pretty bold, isn't it? It's a pretty bold statement to make. You're putting yourself out there. It's not unlike Paul saying you're all going to die or you're all going to live. He's speaking with sure knowledge. The sure knowledge of God. She says to me, 5:30 my time in the morning, 5 o'clock thereabouts, the Lord is going to heal you. And so she said she was to go to a prayer meeting the following night, pray for me. He was going to heal me. She didn't realise I had an x-rays on the Wednesday. And so in my spirit, I instinctively knew that what she was saying was true. So she went to a prayer meeting, I went to the doctor's on the Wednesday. Typically he would take the x-rays, then he'd come in and he'd put them up on the board, and we would look at them and he'd talk about them. Took a little longer to come in this day. And when he did come in, he was subdued. And he put the x-rays up on the board and he paused. It's the kind of things you'll remember for the rest of your life. He paused. And he said, before he clicked the light on, he says, I don't know what you're going to call this. I always remember those words. I do not know what you're going to call this. Which of course is not true. He did know what I was going to call this. And he flipped the light on to the x-rays. My lungs were completely clear. I had been healed by the power of God. That was 30 years ago. Lungs have been fine ever since. So when God tells you to do something, brothers and sisters, and you clearly know it's the voice of God, but it makes no sense, do it. Do what you're led to do. Do what God tells you to do. Trust in Him, and remember this. Your steps are ordered of God. There's a providence in God. It's an old-fashioned word now, but there's the providence of God. He has a plan for you. If He's telling you to do something, it's because He's taking you somewhere, and you have to trust in Him even when it makes no sense. So, I'll leave you with that. But just remember, cutting away the life raft when you're all going to drown, this is often the way of God. That only God could get the glory for all of these men's life being saved. Nobody was going to say they survived because of the life rafts, they survived because of this, that, or the other. God saved those men. God saved the life of Paul. God alone, and God alone gets the glory. God bless you.